The Galactic Empire, a powerful force spread across the stars, had never met a species they couldn't conquer. Their military was vast, their technology far more advanced than any race they had encountered in millennia. Worlds fell before their armies like wheat before a scythe. They measured strength and firepower, and in their eyes, humanity was little more than an insect, swarming on a backwater planet. In their eternal pursuit of dominance, they found no rival capable of challenging their authority. For centuries, the Empire had crushed weaker civilizations with ease. Entire planets were razed, their populations either wiped out or enslaved. Their forces were untouchable, until they turned their gaze to Earth. Humans, they believed, were primitive, a species fighting for survival on a fragile blue orb. A species with no unifying strength, no technological sophistication, no advanced military might. They had observed human history from afar, a divided world, constantly at war with itself, tearing itself apart with petty conflicts, civil wars, and the remnants of ancient battles. The Empire had seen enough. A series of miscalculations, or perhaps a misinterpretation of human politics, led the Empire to believe that humanity would be a quick and easy conquest. An insult from a human diplomat, a human interference in intergalactic trade, minor offenses in the grand scheme of things, but enough to justify war in the eyes of the Empire. They sent a message, brief and to the point, demanding humanity's immediate surrender or face complete annihilation. The Empire's message was blunt: humanity had no place in the galaxy. If they could not bow to the Empire's superiority, they would be crushed under its boot. The message was delivered with cold, unwavering confidence, expecting humanity to cower, to comply, or to be erased without a second thought. The Empire had done it before with countless species. There was no reason to believe humanity would be any different. At first, Earth's response was confusion. No one had ever dared threaten humanity on this scale. Diplomatic talks began in earnest, with the leaders of Earth scrambling to understand the situation. Humans were not prepared for such a war. They were divided, fragmented, and unequipped for a full-scale galactic conflict. Yet the Empire had underestimated one thing about humanity: survival instincts. They were a species that had fought and bled for every inch of their existence. The first few days were a whirlwind of diplomacy. Global leaders convened in secret meetings, knowing the fate of their world rested on their shoulders. They made their first contact with the Empire, offering negotiations, trying to convince the Empire of their peaceful intentions. But the message from the Empire was clear and unwavering: submit, or face total destruction. Humanity's leaders, despite their desperation, knew they couldn't bow to such a demand. Earth's leaders called for a united front. With each passing hour, their confidence waned as they realized the depth of the Empire's power. However, what they lacked in strength they made up for in their knowledge of history. The humans had survived the worst of themselves. They had seen what their own kind was capable of, and that was something the Empire did not understand. What the Empire hadn't counted on was the sheer unpredictability of humans. They assumed their technological advantage would render the Earthlings helpless, but humans were not just survivors. They were a species of fighters. Humans had a unique ability to turn the most destructive force into something else entirely: resilience. When pushed into a corner, they didn't break. They adapted, they fought back, and they learned from their mistakes. This, the Empire would soon learn, was humanity's true strength. As Earth's leaders began to consider their next moves, they faced a critical decision: to negotiate or to fight. The message from the Empire left little room for negotiation. But human leaders, desperate for time, understood one thing: they had to convince the Empire that war would be no easy task. They could not win a battle of strength, they had no illusions about that. But they could fight a war of attrition, a war where the Empire's superior firepower would be worn down by the very thing that had made humanity's wars so brutal in the past: their tenacity. So they did something unexpected. Instead of offering more peace talks, they began to share their history. Not just the sanitized version of humanity's past, but the raw, bloody truth. They started telling the Empire the stories that no one else had ever dared to speak, stories that would make even the most hardened alien officer hesitate. The wars, the genocides, the near-total annihilation of their species, it was all there. Every bloody chapter of humanity's history was laid bare. Human leaders began recounting their history to the Empire in stark detail. They shared the horrors of World War I, where millions perished in trenches, their bodies piled high in the mud. They spoke of the horrors of World War II, where humanity unleashed unprecedented destruction, burning entire cities to the ground with bombs that could level the strongest of fortresses. They told of the Cold War, where humanity stood on the brink of nuclear annihilation, with the capacity to destroy the entire planet with a single push of a button. They recounted the genocides of their own kind, the darkest chapters of human history, where entire populations were erased in the name of ideology, ethnicity, or power. The Empire listened in stunned silence as the humans recounted stories of weapons that tore apart entire cities, of chemical warfare that poisoned the land for generations, and of nuclear winters that scarred the Earth's surface. They spoke of revolutions and civil wars, of empires rising and falling in a never-ending cycle of bloodshed. And through it all, humanity had survived. Not just survived, but rebuilt, each time more resilient, more resourceful, more determined. The Empire's leaders were taken aback. This was not the history of a weak species. This was not the history of a people who crumbled under pressure. This was the history of survivors, of humans who, when faced with total destruction, found a way to endure. They had built weapons that could destroy entire planets, and yet they had not destroyed themselves. They had waged wars of unimaginable cruelty, and yet, when the dust settled, they rebuilt their world. The Empire's confidence began to falter. They had come to Earth expecting to face a weak, divided species, but what they found was something much more dangerous, something they could not easily defeat. Humanity had weathered far worse storms than an intergalactic invasion. The Empire had not just underestimated humanity's strength, they had underestimated the sheer force of their will to survive. The humans' brutal honesty, the raw recounting of their past, shook the very foundation of the Empire's belief in their own superiority. The Galactic Empire, once certain of their impending victory, now found themselves questioning whether they had made a grave mistake. Could they truly defeat such a species? Would war against such a people really be as easy as they thought? The stage was set. The question was no longer whether humanity would submit. It was whether the Empire would risk everything to test their strength against a species that had endured centuries of unimaginable suffering and still stood tall. Humanity, caught off guard by the sudden declaration of war, was initially paralyzed. For all their scientific advancements, they had never anticipated such a direct threat from an outside power. The message from the Galactic Empire wasn't just a warning, it was an ultimatum. There was no room for negotiation, no opportunity for diplomacy. Earth was to either submit or be destroyed. The sheer audacity of the Empire's demands sent shockwaves through the world's leaders. How could they stand against such an overwhelming force? The United Nations convened an emergency session, and for the first time in decades, national borders seemed less important than the collective survival of humanity. The world's most powerful nations sent representatives to discuss a response. But no matter how hard they tried, no matter how they pieced together every resource they could muster, none of their military leaders were willing to entertain the idea of direct confrontation. The Galactic Empire was simply too powerful. It was a force they couldn't hope to defeat. As Earth's political leaders scrambled to make sense of the situation, the public remained mostly unaware of the existential threat hanging over them. The government's assurances did little to calm the growing anxiety among ordinary people. News outlets broadcasted the Empire's message on repeat, further fueling a sense of helplessness. But even in the face of such overwhelming odds, humanity's survival instinct kicked in. There was no immediate surrender. Instead, humanity took a collective breath and decided to play for time. A series of back-channel negotiations began, spearheaded by diplomats who had spent their careers in the shadows of interstellar politics. These negotiators hoped that perhaps, through skillful diplomacy, humanity could delay the inevitable. However, the Galactic Empire showed no interest in talks. Their message had been clear: there would be no discussions, no negotiations. Humanity's compliance was not just expected, it was demanded. And the leaders of the empire, confident in their technology, believed humanity would be forced to capitulate quickly. But the diplomats weren't the only ones taking action. Among the various factions on Earth, a growing sentiment began to take root. If the empire wanted war, they could have it. The human response shifted from pleading for mercy to something far more unexpected. A few human military strategists, with knowledge of Earth's tumultuous past, proposed a radical countermeasure. If diplomacy wouldn't work, perhaps humanity's violent history could. A decision was made to send a response to the empire, not a message of submission or surrender, but one of defiance. It was not a display of military strength, but a recounting of humanity's darkest moments. Earth's leaders would share their bloody history in detail, fully aware that the empire might find it repulsive. But perhaps that was the point. They hoped that the empire, for all its technological superiority, might falter at the realization that humanity had been tested in ways no other species in the galaxy ever had. The message was brief but filled with chilling specifics: humanity's long and brutal history of war, genocide, and internal strife. The Empire had no idea of the horrors Earth had endured, nor did they understand the ferocity with which humans had fought not only against each other but against their own worst impulses. The message was not framed as a plea for mercy, but rather as an unflinching recounting of humanity's darkest chapters. As the diplomats and military strategists worked to craft the response, they shared stories that most people on Earth had long tried to forget: the wars of the 20th century, the nuclear standoffs of the Cold War, the mass genocides that left entire populations wiped from existence, and the internal collapse and reformation of nations through bloodshed. The message from humanity was simple: we have survived worse. We have come out of the darkest times not as weak, but as stronger than ever before. We have fought wars on a scale and with a savagery you cannot comprehend. And if you wish to wage war, we are more than ready. But you will find we are not like the other species you've conquered. Humanity's war history was filled with violence, some justified, much of it not. The message was cold, objective, and unmistakably clear: the Empire was not dealing with a naive, defenseless species. Humans had built empires and destroyed them, had launched wars with horrifying efficiency, and had survived as a result of their ability to adapt, to learn, and to become even more brutal when necessary. The message wasn't a threat in the traditional sense. It was an honest assessment of humanity's capacity for destruction. It was not a call for peace, but a warning: if the Empire wanted war, it would find that humans would meet it head-on with a ruthlessness and resilience they had never faced before. In the Empire's vast bureaucracy, officials, generals, and diplomats who had read the message were taken aback. The response was not one they had expected. They had anticipated fear, submission, and perhaps a few token attempts at resistance, but nothing like this. They had assumed that their technological superiority would make humanity bend, that their military might would cause humans to collapse under the pressure. But as they read the detailed accounts of Earth's past, a few began to question the wisdom of their approach. The message didn't portray humanity as a proud race, but as a deeply scarred one, with a history marked by destruction but also by survival. It made the Empire's leaders pause. In their arrogance, they had assumed their power was enough to crush any species. But this message was a reminder that there were forces far beyond technology, forces of will, survival, and a history of bloodshed that might be just as dangerous as any weapon. What the Galactic Empire hadn't anticipated was that humanity's past, filled with carnage and conflict, might be the very thing that would make them rethink the war they were about to wage. With no room for diplomacy, and the threat of extinction hanging over them, humanity's leaders began to prepare for the worst. Despite the overwhelming odds, they refused to bend. The message from the Empire had struck a chord deeper than expected, sparking a surge of defiance across the globe. Earth would not be cowed. A more radical, unorthodox idea began to form in the minds of a few key figures in the United Nations: if diplomacy and military might had failed, perhaps humanity's greatest weapon lay in the very history the Empire so casually dismissed. For all its advanced technology, the Galactic Empire had underestimated humanity's psychological resilience. Earth's history, though marred by bloodshed and war, was one of constant survival against all odds. And humanity's wars, those fought on Earth itself, were like no others in the galaxy. Leaders around the world understood that it wasn't just about military power anymore. It was about showing the Empire just how dangerous humanity could be if pushed too far. There was a reason humanity had survived millennia of conflict and technological arms races. Humanity was built from war, and in the face of extinction, it was war they would show the Empire. An emergency broadcast was set in motion, one that was to be sent to the Empire's leaders directly. Human representatives, each speaking from their own nation's perspective, would recount the darkest, bloodiest moments of Earth's history. The decision was made not to sugarcoat the past, not to present humanity as some noble, innocent species, but to show the Empire exactly what they were dealing with: humanity's capacity for destruction. The broadcasts began with the Great World Wars, two global conflicts that shaped the course of human history. The first, an unprecedented catastrophe that had torn the planet asunder, had left tens of millions dead in just a few years. The second had seen humanity's use of nuclear weapons on an unprecedented scale, leaving entire cities as smoldering ruins. The Empire's leaders, upon hearing these accounts, were shocked. Such destruction, deliberate, strategic, and born of sheer human ingenuity, was beyond anything the Empire had ever witnessed. The Empire had seen many worlds ravaged by war, but not like this. The broadcast moved on to more recent conflicts: the Cold War, a period where humanity had come to the brink of annihilation not once, but several times. The Earth had been divided by ideologies and distrust, and yet both sides, despite having weapons capable of wiping out civilization, had refused to give in. The possibility of nuclear war had been a constant, yet humanity had somehow managed to prevent its own destruction, relying on diplomacy and an underlying understanding of just how far they could go before it was too late. The Empire, accustomed to brute force and intimidation, had no framework for this kind of psychological warfare. Then came the modern wars, the insurgencies, the guerrilla movements, the internal civil wars fought not between armies, but between ideologies and survival instincts. Human history was littered with instances of smaller, seemingly inconsequential conflicts that had nonetheless seen massive bloodshed, as civilians, soldiers, and governments alike tested the boundaries of human cruelty. From the forgotten corners of history, stories emerged of entire populations driven to madness by war, pushing their civilizations to the brink of collapse, only to rebuild in the aftermath with an ever-deepening thirst for progress. The final part of the broadcast was perhaps the most striking: humanity's repeated rebirth from its own ashes. While the galaxy's empires had advanced by conquering and absorbing other species, humanity's greatest strength lay in its ability to rise from the devastation of its own making. Each time civilization seemed on the brink of collapse, humanity had rebuilt itself, stronger, more capable, and more ruthless than before. No matter how many times Earth had been torn apart, no matter how many generations had been lost to war, humanity's will to survive had always emerged unbroken. As the broadcast ended, the message was clear: the Galactic Empire had underestimated the resilience of humanity. What they saw as primitive, fractured, and weak was, in fact, a species tempered by millennia of war, capable of unimaginable destruction. Humanity was not a species to be crushed by mere firepower. If they were pushed, they would fight back, not just with technology, but with the kind of relentless determination that only a species with such a brutal history could understand. The Empire, in all its technological superiority, had no idea what it had just triggered. The message to the Galactic Empire was clear, brutal, and unrelenting. As the broadcast began, humanity's leaders did not try to soften their history. Instead, they laid bare every dark chapter of Earth's past. They spoke not of victories but of the cost of those victories, recounting wars that spanned centuries, each more devastating than the last. The Empire, accustomed to fighting without mercy, had no idea what they were about to hear. The broadcast began with the two world wars, two global conflicts that left an indelible scar on humanity. Leaders spoke of the millions of lives lost, of entire cities reduced to rubble, and the brutal technologies humanity had used to wage these wars. Nuclear bombs, chemical weapons, and weapons of mass destruction, tools of unimaginable horror, all deployed by human hands. The Galactic Empire, with its seemingly superior weapons and advanced military, had never faced such a brutal, resourceful species capable of such devastating ingenuity. The leaders didn't hold back, detailing the human penchant for total warfare, the willingness to sacrifice entire generations for victory. Next came the Cold War, a conflict fought not with direct battle, but with the constant threat of global annihilation. For decades, humanity held its breath, not knowing whether the world would end in a flash of nuclear fire. The broadcast emphasized the sheer madness of this period, humanity's willingness to point weapons at itself in a constant game of brinkmanship, surviving through sheer willpower and paranoia. The message drove home the point: humans didn't just fight wars, they fought with an unparalleled capacity for self-destruction, a willingness to wipe everything out and rebuild again. In doing so, they had learned something the Empire had yet to grasp: the ability to endure. The broadcast shifted to the more recent conflicts. The Gulf War, the Balkan Wars, the endless proxy wars fought in Africa and Asia, each one a testament to humanity's tendency to drag itself into conflict. But the humans did not merely list these wars, they detailed the destruction of entire societies, the genocides that left no survivors, the bombs that fell like rain on cities that were home to millions of civilians. The Empire, so used to targeting military installations and seeing war as a controlled, scientific operation, had never encountered a species that could wage such senseless, total destruction. Perhaps most striking was the final, damning piece of the broadcast: the wars humanity waged against itself. The broadcast recounted the civil wars, the revolutions, the genocides, the countless examples of humans turning on their own kind. Yet, even after each disaster, after every catastrophe, humanity had rebuilt. The broadcast wasn't about glorifying these moments of destruction, but about showing the Empire that humanity, despite all odds, had never fully broken. Time and time again, humans had risen from the ashes. And then the final words of the broadcast were delivered, not as a plea, but as a statement of fact. We are not like the other species you've conquered. We do not fall to extinction easily. We will never surrender. You want war? We've fought wars for centuries. We will show you what that really means. But know this: war with us is not a battle you can win in the traditional sense. We are not a species that dies quietly. We adapt, we rebuild, and we keep coming. For the first time, the leaders of the Galactic Empire began to question their decision. The humans had not offered peace or surrender. They had offered only a stark look into the abyss of their past, and in doing so, they had shown the Empire something terrifying: humanity's ability to survive any conflict, no matter the odds. The Empire, so accustomed to easy victories, found themselves hesitating. The humans had no army capable of matching the Empire's firepower, but they had something far more dangerous: an unyielding will to fight, an unmatched resilience, and a history of surviving their darkest hours. The Empire had expected a quick conquest. Instead, they found themselves staring into the heart of a species that could, and would, fight back with every ounce of their brutal history. The stakes had changed.